Hi guys, and welcome to my home and welcome to the very first Sunday Bakealong with me, where I'm going to be showing you guys how to make really classic bakes, things that you should definitely just have in your repertoire, things that are really simple and easy to make and perfect for a nice Sunday bake for when your friends and family are coming around. So this is the first one, and I'm going to be starting off by doing a really delicious decadent devil's food cake, and this is going to be a light, moist, airy sponge filled with a really lovely rich chocolate ganache. Now hopefully you'll have seen on Instagram earlier in the week I gave you all the ingredients and measurements for this recipe already and all the equipment that you need, so make sure you've got all that ready to go before you start. Don't worry if you haven't got all those ingredients, if you didn't see that earlier this week, just pause the video now, nip to the shops, go and get what you need, and then we'll get cracking. So the first thing I'm going to do is to start with my frosting, and this is a kind of ganache frosting, loosely based on actual ganache, which is chocolate and cream. But unlike ganache, this doesn't really set that firm. In fact, it stays really silky and glossy through the whole thing, which is really lovely. It makes it really sort of rich and decadent. And also I'm making it now because it can keep quite well while we're getting on with our other stuff, unlike actual ganache, which can sometimes set quite firm. So I'm going to do it in a bain-marie, which is just a heat-proof bowl over a pan of simmering water. If you have a microwave, you can do this in a microwave too, just in short bursts, stirring after each one, but I don't have a microwave. So I've got some lovely dark chocolate. This is actually 55% cocoa solid. So that was 225 grams of chocolate, and I also have 175 grams of butter. This is unsalted butter. And I'm also adding 100 millilitres of double cream. That's heavy cream if you're in America. And I'm also just going to add a pinch of salt, and that's just going to help to bring the flavour out and balance the sugar and the sweetness a little bit. And now I'm going to pop this onto my pan. Okay, so my pan is nicely simmering. The water is only about this much in the pan because I don't want it to touch the bottom of the bowl. If it touches the bottom of the bowl, it can heat everything up too much. Too hot chocolate is kind of gross. It goes a bit bitty and really bitter. So don't do that. Also, don't get any water in your bowl because that can seize up the chocolate as well. So just leave it on a nice sort of medium-low heat, just simmering away, melting together, and give it a stir every now and then just to make sure it's melting properly. It's all starting to melt now and it's looking really yummy and chocolatey and gooey and smells amazing. So just keep stirring every now and then and just keep it going until it's all completely combined. So my ganache is all lovely and melted. I'm just going to leave that to cool down, and it will be completely cool when we need to use it, obviously, because there's a lot to do still. Now it is time for the devil's food cake recipe, and this is so easy and so good. It results in a really lovely, light but really moist cake. So the first thing I'm going to do is to get my wet ingredients together just in a bowl. I have my light brown sugar, and I've got 150 grams of that. I've also got 75 grams of cocoa powder, and just make sure you're using a really nice quality cocoa powder for extra oomph. And I'm also putting in a teaspoon of good quality vanilla extract. If you want, you could use like a whole pod of vanilla if you have such a thing. And then to finish it off, I'm just gonna grab some boiling water. I've just boiled this kettle, and I'm measuring out 375 millilitres, which is actually the same as 375 grams. So I'm doing it on my scales. And I'm just gonna whisk that all together until it's completely combined. Make sure you've got rid of all the little lumps of cocoa powder, and also that your sugar is dissolved completely. And that is ready. So I'm just gonna put that to one side to cool down a little bit, while I get on with beating my butter and sugar together. So you can do this with a freestanding mixer like me, if you have one, or you can do it with your handheld mixer, or you can even do it with a wooden spoon and your brute strength, which does take obviously quite a bit longer than this old thing. But obviously I have one of these, so I'm just gonna crack on with this. So I have my butter, which is nice and soft, and I have 200 grams of that. I'm also going to add some caster sugar, and I have 225 grams of that. And then I want to beat that together for about 5 minutes until it's really pale and fluffy. So obviously this is the first of our Sunday Bakealongs, and I am going to be doing more classic things, but if there's anything that you really want to see, any really super duper classic things that you want to learn how to make, or just something that you really fancy eating on a Sunday, then let me know in the comments box below, and I will do my best to add it in. So that's had about 5 minutes whipping, and it is really pale and fluffy, like way more than it was when I started, so that's just right. And now it's time to add the eggs, and I've got 3 large free-range organic eggs, which I always use. Make sure that you use those 2 if you can, because they will make better cakes and they're better for the hens. So I'm going to crack those in and beat them really well after each one, probably for about a minute each. And once your first egg's combined, you can add the second one. All right, that is fine. It's looking a little bit split and scrambled. Don't worry if yours does too. It's absolutely fine. Once you add the dry ingredients, that'll just come together and it'll just be like a normal cake batter. Speaking of dry ingredients, I have some here, which I'm gonna sieve together in a bowl, and I've got 335 grams of plain flour here, and I'm also adding a teaspoon each of bicarbonate of soda and baking powder to give it a lift. And then just shuffle that through your sieve. And then just pop that into the rest of the mixture, and I'm just gonna fold that in really slowly. So on my lowest setting on my mixer, if you're not using a mixer, you will just want to use like a metal spoon or a spatula just to fold it in really gently. So once that's all coming together, you can then put your wet ingredients in. I'm going to keep the mixer going on a low speed while I do that. So obviously if you're doing that too, do it quite slowly, otherwise it will spray everywhere. So make sure that you have subscribed to my channel if you haven't already, because obviously this is an extra upload and there's going to be more extra uploads, and if you haven't subscribed and click the bell down below, then you might miss something, and I would hate for that to happen, and I think you would too. So once all your liquid's in, you might see, if you're using a sanding mixer like this, that it's not quite picking up again. Always make sure that you scrape the sides. You don't want to get any nuggets of buttery sugar in your bake, otherwise they will bake like holes into your cakes, and that is really gross. So give it a good old scrape every now and then. Obviously, if you don't have a freestanding mixer and you're just doing this with a spoon and brute strength, then you would be folding in the wet ingredients with a spoon or a spatula as well. So that's ready, and it's looking like very much like a liquidy chocolate pudding. Kind of delicious actually. So get rid of all the bits you don't need and bring back the bits you do need. So I'm using 3 7-inch tins, which I've greased just with spray. You can use butter or oil if you want. If you don't have 3 7-inch tins, or if you have different size pans, don't worry, I'm going to be putting 2 versions of the quantities in the description box below, so in case you don't have quite the right thing. But I'm going to be doing a 3-layer cake, so that's what I'm going to be doing. So now I'm going to distribute my liquidy batter evenly among these 3 pans. Now it's time to bake your cakes, and you want to do that at 170 degrees C for 25 to 27 minutes, obviously sticking a skewer in to make sure it's cooked all the way through. Meanwhile, I would recommend that you give your ganache a stir just to make sure that it's cooling down evenly and it's not splitting or anything. This is looking pretty good. And obviously just kind of make yourself a cup of tea and relax. So I will see you back here in 25 minutes. So it's really important to check all your sponges for readiness with your skewer, because this one's ready, for example, but the other 2 had maybe a minute or 2 left on them. You don't want to just assume they're all done just because one is. So leave them to cool for about 15 minutes, and then when you're ready, turn them out of the tin. It's better to do this while it's slightly warm, otherwise it could end up sticking to the pan. And now we just need to let them cool down completely before we start icing them. So it's time to decorate the cakes, and my ganache is looking perfect. It's got a really lovely sort of floppy, spreadable consistency, and it's looking glossy and yummy. I'm going to be leveling all the layers of my sponge just so I've got a nice flat surface on each layer. I'm not going to trim this one though because I actually quite like the edge of a chocolate cake. It's a little bit like a brownie, which is tasty. If you have a cake leveler, like a special cake leveler, that is obviously a very, very useful tool and will give you a nice straight top. If you don't have one, like I'm not using mine today, I'm going to be using a bread knife. It's really, really simple. So as you can see, this sponge has risen a little bit higher on this side and it's quite low this side. So I'm going to focus my attention on this side, and I don't want to go right to the very bottom because obviously that will be a very small sponge, but I'm going to take it about 1 inch in and start to make a cut. And as I go round, I'm going to turn my cake on my plate and keep my bread knife super level. That's why you want to do a little bit at a time before you start spinning. And then once you've met the point at which you started, just really gently draw your knife across underneath. So once you've taken the top off, you can usually see if you've made any mistakes, and you can just tidy those up again with your bread knife, like if there's any sort of weird lips happening, but this looks pretty good. And also you get to have a bit to try. So make sure you do try at this point because you know it's important to know what you've just made. Now we're just gonna finish off trimming all of our cakes so they're all nice and ready. You can obviously do this on a turntable if you have one, but if you don't have one, the plate trick works really well because the plate moves really easily on the worktop. Move your pile of scraps out of the way. I like to keep mine close so that I can have a nibble on them every now and then. And now it's time to decorate. So if you haven't got a turntable, you can just keep them on the plate. The plate's really good for turning it around because it moves quite easily on the counter. Obviously I have a turntable, so I will be using that because life's just so much easier with a turntable. And if you're going to be baking cakes, you know, a lot in your lifetime, then it's definitely worth the investment. So go nuts. So I've got a really pretty plate here. That's what my cake's going to be iced onto. So starting with my first layer, I'm just going to pop that on. And I'm going to get some of my lovely ganache and dollop it on the inside and give it a good spread. So spread it right to the edge and make sure you end up with a nice flat layer. And then do the same with the next layer. Make sure you're lining it up with the sides all the way around. You don't want to end up with like a staggered cake. And then with the top layer, what you want to do is turn it upside down because it's got a lovely, neat and tidy bottom and it's nice and flat. That's looking nice and straight. So now it's time to finish this guy off with the rest of my ganache. Now in terms of tools, obviously I've been using a small cranked palette knife to do the filling. I like doing that just because you can get a nice straight flat top. When I'm doing the outside, I tend to move over to a larger not cranked palette knife. This is just a straight palette knife, but it's completely up to you. If you don't have either of those things, you can just improvise using maybe a butter knife or even a spatula will work. Obviously a slightly different finish, but whatever floats your boat. So for now, just pop the rest of your ganache onto the top of your cake. So using my palette knife, I'm going to start spreading it out, and as you will see, it'll start to flop over the sides, which is good because then I'll have some on the sides that I can use. So this ganache is actually a dream to ice with because it's so silky and soft, and it's really forgiving as well. Because it doesn't kind of dry out and crisp up while you're doing things with it. Okay, so you can keep this as rustic or as smooth as you like, but what I like to do is add a little bit of texture. So I'm going to switch up my palette knives, go back to my small one. As my cake spins round, I'm going to lightly press my palette knife in to make an impression and then draw it up a little bit at a time until I get to the top. Should be left with a really nice pattern. As I've moved up, it's kind of pushed the icing up to create a little lip on the top, and I quite like that. So to end it off, I'm just going to draw my palette knife across and back and forth to create another new pattern. and that is the finished cake, and it is looking pretty special. So hopefully you two are standing next to your very own Devil's Food cake, so thank you very much for baking along with me. Make sure you take a photograph of your cake and put it on Instagram using the hashtag Cupcake Jemma Bakes. I'm going to be checking in all day to see how you got on. Also, if you have questions about this bake as you've been going, then put them in the comments box below. I'll try and get to them as you're baking. And hopefully you're going to enjoy this cake because it is so good. So let's crack on and get a slice out. So before I start filling my gob with this cake, which will render me incapable of talking to you, I just want to thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed it. I have. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another Bakealong Sunday vibe. And this time it's going to be a lemon drizzle cake, which will be so delicious. So make sure you're following me on Instagram so that you get the update on recipes and ingredients lists and stuff like that, which I'll post a few days beforehand. I'll also be back at the usual time on a Thursday, 6:30 p.m. GMT. This time with a unicorn cake, but not just any unicorn cake. This is going to be a full unicorn cake with the full shebang. We're going to have horns, we're going to have ears, eyes, gold, all of the things. So make sure you tune into that. I'll see you then. Bye.